Hello, welcome everybody. Good morning and welcome to this episode in EMPA's free webinar series. First, thank you so much for this opportunity to play Graham Norton with you today. I'm your moderator, Lorraine Churchill. I serve as a member of EMPA's board as well as Washington's Homeland Security and Emergency Management Center of Excellence. The United Kingdom's Emergency Practitioners in Crisis Communication, also known as EPIC, and as Master Public Information Manager as part of my emergency management role here in the States. While I'm joining you from the beautiful Pacific Northwest here in the US, this webinar is broadcasting from Nam, Melbourne, and we'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, and their connections to land, sea, and community. We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities, past, present, future, and are grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence. Today's webinar focus is the future survivor, the survivor of today. Our speakers helping us today include Dr. Anne Lane, who is Associate Professor and Researcher at Queensland University of Technology. Her areas of interest and research specializations are stakeholder engagement, social impact, dialogue, and storytelling. She is widely published internationally in these areas and has been invited to present on related topics to academic and practitioner audiences. Dr. Lane's work involves providing quality data that helps organizations identify, understand, and respond to community sentiment. She aims to find or create ways in which organizations and their stakeholders can co-create a shared understanding of and mutually acceptable solutions to intractable issues. We could sure use her help, right? Most recently, Dr. Lane has worked as part of the NHRA-funded team that researched community experiences of the 2022 East Coast floods. Together with her colleague, Professor Kim Johnson, also from QUT, she interviewed over 50 community members in the Brisbane and Gympie areas. If I said that wrong, please correct me. The findings of this research provided empirical evidence of the impacts these floods have had on communities and therefore have implications for community flood preparation and recovery. Also joining us is Laura Calo Woolcott, who's fueled by a passion for connection, resilience, and engagement, and is on a mission to empower individuals and communities. Laura wears several hats, but her focus is always on fostering innovation and redefining possibilities. Her work spans over 20 countries, collaborating with various sectors, including local government, nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, media studios, Fortune 100 companies, and small businesses. From consulting to volunteering, she applies her skill sets to various activities. Currently, Laura has 2 roles for Ballina Shire Council. As the IT Learning Development Officer for about 5 years, Laura designs online courses and in-person workshops and delivers dynamic programming to simplify complex topics and propel individuals towards efficiency and effectiveness in work and life. In December 2022, after months of volunteering and local recovery efforts, she began a secondary role as Community Recovery Officer funded through the New South Wales Reconstruction Authority in response to the 2022 floods. Her work involves collaborating with local government agencies, nonprofits, and recovery support, serves to provide opportunities for community members to reconnect, recover, and build resilience. As a Puerto Rican raised in Texas and now residing in Australia, Laura loves sharing her culture, language, food, and customs with her new Northern Rivers community. She serves as a secretary and a bush firefighter with the Lennox Head RFS and is the drone shark mitigation officer for All Girls Surf Club. Keep an eye out when traveling the coastal highways, as you might spot Laura catching a wave or on a stand-up paddleboard with her dog Lola. Laura is currently resides with her family in Ballina, New South Wales, Australia, and often returns to her US base in San Antonio, Texas. Finally, we have our main event, Desiree Matel-Anderson, affectionately known as Desi, who is the disaster world's equivalent to MacGyver. Armed with a team of design thinking volunteers, Desi empowers survivors to think beyond their current predicament and disrupt the status quo to build resilience. Desi also runs dew tanks around the world where participants solve for future disasters, including earthquakes, floods, tornadoes, and windstorms. Desi shares her learnings as an expert lecturer on innovation at Harvard, Yale, and Berkeley, to name a few. As the chief wrangler of the Field Innovation Team, FIT, Desi has worked with communities from Vancouver to Oklahoma and from New York to Nepal. When things go wrong, Desi is often first on site and understands that each disaster is unique and will require an adaptive response. Projects have included assisting the scene with social media analysis during the Boston Marathon bombings, deploying drones and 3D print topography maps for incident command after the Oso, Washington mudslides, using AI robots for psychosocial services in Syrian refugee camps, survivor-to-survivor guides after the Fort McMurray wildfires in Alberta, Canada, and public health gaming to educate the Miami-Dade public school system on the Zika virus outbreak. She also serves as a consultant on innovation for agencies and governments nationally and internationally, including an advisor role to the European Emergency Management Consortium and UNESCO's IREACT team, and was recently appointed to United States National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Desi was also the first and now former Chief Innovation Advisor at the Federal Emergency Management Agency here in the States. Her black leather coat and boots have become synonymous with real-time problem solving and disaster response and recovery. When Desi is not deployed, she enjoys the fresh mountain air in Utah with her dogs and family and is occasionally even spotted in jeans. So as we move on, Desi published her book, which we're going to focus on, Future Survivor, in 2020, sharing her problem-solving solutions gained from over a decade of in-the-field case studies to advocate crisis resolution. But is the future survivor the survivor of today? So Desi, we turn this over to you to lead the conversation.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Barb.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, as well as Adrian. I know Adrian's always working behind the scenes. And thank you for joining us. Today, we are going to do a quick 3 case studies, give some foundation to future survivor from around the world. And then we really want to spend the time learning from you. Whether you have read Future Survivor or you haven't yet, it doesn't matter. You have been a part of a global pandemic. So we've all had a lot of experience and we want to hear from you. So my hope is to make this slide deck quickly go through a couple of fundamental pieces that we've seen over a 10-year span of case studies that we have seen in the field and some of the meta themes that we've seen in future survivors, but then get to you. We want to hear from you. And certainly I want to hear from my esteemed colleagues, Anne and Laura as well, who will have some great experiences to share about Australia. So with that, let me share my screen and get on with the show. All right, this is just to give you a big picture view of some of the future survivors from around the world, from Nepal to Europe, to North America, South America. We have some Aussies in here as well, the Middle East. These are our future survivors, and we are growing in numbers. So just a fantastic group of folks. But what do all these future survivors have in common? And over a 10-year period, since we published Future Survivor, we've had a chance to take a look at some of the meta themes of what the commonalities are in these survivors. And then at the end, my hope is to talk a little bit about what has changed, especially what's changed since 2020, when this book was published and we all went through this global pandemic together, and what we're seeing as our future survivor of today and the future. So with that, my examples are going to be a US example, a Canada example, and a Middle East example. I do have case studies for Australia, and certainly you guys do as well as New Zealand. But we've got fantastic folks on this call, Dr. Anne and Laura, who are going to provide some of that case study information, And our hope is that you guys will also share examples of bushfires, flooding, and earthquakes that you've experienced, or even just from the pandemic and what you've seen from these future survivors. This picture is a consortium of Australians, Canadians, and Americans at a boot camp a couple of years ago in Utah. Every year we have, or I should say every other year, we get about 40 emergency managers, public information officers, future survivors who've been in disasters. We come together and we problem solve over a weekend in a beautiful mountainous region of northern Utah, and we come up with solutions. So one of the key things that we have found over 10 years of study and many case studies is that future survivors are innovative. So I definitely want you to think in the recesses of your minds when you've had to be innovative in a disaster, or even just innovative at work. And one of the examples that I'm going to share is going to start in Alabama. In the United States, on the eastern side of Alabama, the northeastern part of Alabama, which is on the eastern side of the United States, there is a beautiful area of open land in Appalachia. And it's very rural communities. There isn't a lot of resources, but one thing's for sure, they get a ton of deadly night tornadoes. And here we are, this is after 2011, when Anthony Clifton, the emergency manager that you see in the middle of this picture, has just experienced 67 tornadoes in 1 year in 2011. So as you can see, it's a couple of years later, but his emergency operations center has been well used, and certainly a lot of his communication staff and the folks that are running the response, recovery, and resiliency efforts are working together to come up with innovative solutions because they have seen so many tornadoes. And one of the challenges they were having was how to work with mass care and sheltering. And so what you see in this photo is Anthony drawing out the tornado track lines, because like I said, they experienced a lot of deadly night tornadoes because they have some really interesting meteorological data from some of the Gulf Stream that comes through this particular part of the Appalachia. And he's helping to map those tornadoes, the 67 tornadoes, as well as where we could set up mass care and sheltering and work with the American Red Cross to help support innovative ways to get people short-term, mid-term, and long-term sheltering. So super neat and interesting experience about how we have to be flexible, how we have to be innovative. And what that led to were all these different designs. So several communities all over the United States said, we want to contribute. We want to come up with an innovative way to do this for this emergency support function. And so we had communities in California, communities in Texas who had experienced earthquake or hurricanes. We had fires in California. We also had Florida with their tropical storms. These 4 states came together and they started working on creating prototypes of mass care and sheltering. And here's one example from the wildfires in Paradise, California, where we were, and this is to scale, starting to prototype out what this innovative way of being a future survivor might look like, in developing a mass care sheltering plan that works with communities. And so with that, what ended up happening is we did come up with a lot of different prototypes, but between all these communities in these 4 states, there was a theme of making sure that the communities were at the helm of helping to design their own sheltering plans and building out a guide for that. And so with that, I'd love for us to watch this quick 3-minute invigorating video from their own experiences, what they were doing and what was important to them as future survivors in these tornadoes, wildfires, hurricanes, and tropical storms.
Number one, all disasters are local. They begin and they end locally. People can come in and help, but they move on to the next disaster. The community is here and they have the vested interest.
Anytime that you can have any type of planning ahead, you are better able to cope with the initial shock that comes with disaster.
As the planet continues to change, its environment impacts communities like Miami Beach, we have to be constantly understanding what we can do to prevent life loss and property loss, and that's part of why we're doing what we're doing.
So we work with the emergency management, we work with the community members, and we work with a whole lot of interesting innovators to really listen to where the challenges are, the most complex. And then we use a 3-step design process, a 3-step prep with the community, with the incident command, and we work to come up with really innovative solutions in these disasters.
Emergency preparedness is for everybody. It's not just for the professionals in the field, but even the average citizen, community members should be involved and proactively engaged in having these conversations ahead of time.
It is a co-creation process. We're all about working together. We empower survivors and community members to come together to create cutting-edge disaster solutions. And without the community, without the emergency managers, solutions are only going to be part way. We've got to come as a whole community together to make those solutions.
Events like this do propose solutions where we probably may not have thought of before.
It helps us to realize what the agencies can come together to help us and become the self-sufficient community that we really need to be.
The connections that get made here, I know, will help us serve the community better. It's going to translate into how people keep responding step by step as the situation develops.
It's about having business, industry, faith-based community, civic organizations, everybody coming together to support each other.
It's always so heartwarming to see the large number of volunteers supporting local communities when a disaster strikes. This partnership aligns perfectly with our mission of creating opportunities for every community in which we serve.
Just to recap on this particular video you just watched, what ended up happening is these 4 states came up with tailored mass care and sheltering programs for their communities, and it's all community based, and it takes all of the emergency management language and lingo and it boils it down into really specific things that any community member could come and pick up, and it's built by these communities. So and food for thought, Lorraine had brought it up previous to the call when we were doing the preparatory, but we really believe from what we've seen in these past 10 years around the world that disasters start and end local. And at some point, I'd love to hear a conversation. I know we've got Sarah O'Brien and her team on the call, and I have a feeling you guys have some great innovative practices that you've seen with local communities work and continue to flourish. Another quick elemental piece about future survivors that we've seen in these 10 years of study is that they streamline processes. And let me explain that before I talk about the photos in the 2 photos below. I am a guest lecturer at the Naval Postgraduate, and I do a lot of work with different universities and master's students and PhD students all over the United States, but also around the world. And one of the questions I always get from students is, we are master's students, we are PhD students, we are senior in our field of work in emergency management or public information work. And what I always say is that's great. And then they always follow that up with, but then why can't we have more difficult, complicated processes to go through? And the answer to that is we don't want to make the process complicated, because we want to get you to the end result and to the solution. That's the most important thing. So your process should be simple. And so one of the things that we've seen in these communities is that they streamline processes. And so on the left-hand side is a picture of the city of Ottawa and a reserve of Canadian emergency managers, city officials, volunteers, emergency medical service directors, everyone who has responded previously to what they had been struck by tornadoes and flooding, and they were looking at ways to streamline their processes. And to your right, you see a group on the western side of Canada instead of the eastern side in Alberta, in the town of High River, where they were working together after a massive flood struck Alberta to streamline processes for volunteer surge. So both these communities on the eastern side of Canada, as well as on the western side of Canada, used simple, streamlined processes in being a future survivor. And that ended up being extremely critical, because if you look at that left-hand picture again, that group of people just responded to twin twisters that struck Ottawa about a week ago. And I was able to check in with them because we did this dew tank in 2019. They were able to use a lot of the work in the innovation that they created and the streamlined processes to help support their community members. It ended up being a fabulous response. So kudos to them for being future survivors. And I am going to move and focus on the right-hand group, which is this town of High River and their volunteer surge. So they came up with prototypes. They really streamlined their process. And what you see again is a picture of somebody actually drawing out in an Excel sheet with color coding ideas and how we were going to streamline volunteer surge and get the information out to volunteers. And what you see on the right-hand side is what started to become a technical mapping of where we were going to place volunteers and make sure that we were able to get them the tasks virtually before they even came to the reception center. And what that developed in the end, when we streamlined this, was an app that when volunteers would come into the town, they would receive a message on their phone because the app had a geofence around it. And so you would get this message saying, are you here to volunteer? If so, download this app. They would download the app. And in the process of downloading it, they'd be asked questions about, are you volunteering? These are the forms you need to fill out. Everything was electronic. And at the very end, it would ask you, what are the tasks you would like to take on? And it would have certain tasks in queue. And once those tasks filled up, whether it be cleaning up and supporting cleaning up of houses or working in the reception center with donations, those tasks would get checked off. If we had enough volunteers, the community would say, you need to go to another task and you'd have to pick. So if somebody showed up and they were registered and they had all their forms filled out and they had tasks that they were queued to go into, when they went into the reception center, they would simply be given the materials they needed and then sent back out on their way. So super efficient and streamlined process. And of course, if there were too many volunteers and all the tasks were filled, they were simply told on the app, we're filled for today. We're so thankful. Come back tomorrow and register ahead of time. And then if it works, come to the reception center and you can help with the task. So it really helped them to streamline their process, get the volunteer surge under control, and create a unified and uniform and organized message to thousands of people. So what did the town do? And the pictures here are actually of how we tested it, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure it works before we put it into a disaster. And they didn't want to do another flood because it was extremely traumatizing to go through it. So we came up with a game where it was called Mystery on Main Street, and we hid the town mayor, and all the townspeople and volunteers from all over Alberta came in and they had to register on the app and go through, and they would be given clues to help find the town mayor. And it ended up that we ended up in George Lane Park and the mayor was found. And this was kind of full circle for this community of, again, creating this incredible opportunity to harness volunteer surge, really take on a message and make sure that it gets out in a proliferated way. And it was innovative, and it really thought of how we are going to streamline this process. And my third and final example, again, there's so many besides being innovative and streamlining processes, is future survivors. They are full of the possibilities. They allow for those possibilities. And this is the Middle East example. We had 2 deployments to Lebanon and to Syria during the Syrian refugee crisis, which is still going on. And on the left-hand picture, you can see we are with youth. We are talking through some ideas on how to help support evacuation routes, because messaging was really hard to get through. Communication lines were tied. And sadly enough, the camp that we were working with was in the Bekaa Valley. They had a fire. And because of just not having an organized evacuation route with clear communication throughout the camp, there was a bottleneck and there was a loss of a child, sadly, from that in the fire. And on the right-hand side, what you're seeing is you're seeing the back of the centenarian of the camp. He was over 100 years old, and I had looked at his Syrian ID card, and he was very wise, along with the Shuish, which is the leader of the camp, Ali. And we were given and granted permission to work with them, with a whole host of people from around the world on this evacuation project. And they really were about figuring out the possibilities, super important. So with that, what we ended up doing was coming up with a virtual reality evacuation route where we divided the camp into quadrants, and we filmed through a 360 lens the evacuation routes. So if you were in quadrant 2 and 2B, you would have a route of how to get out if there were a fire, if you were in that quadrant. And so each family coming into the camp would be given this information on wherever they were located, so that we could have a much more organized evacuation. And that proved to be a really smart way to do it. But the question you guys are probably all asking is, that's all great, but if you have refugees and they've left their homes in Syria, they don't have their homes, they don't have resources, would they really have access to tapping into technology? And for those who have done some relief work in the Middle East, or anywhere in the world these days, you'll know that future survivors always have a cell phone. It seems to be the thing. And so every family that was coming into this camp had one smartphone. I did not come across anyone who did not have a smartphone. I think I had one gentleman, the gentleman who was the centenarian, he had a flip phone. We did have a solution for him as well. But for the most part, the vast majority had smartphones. So what we would do is we would download those communication messages down. They would visually watch the evacuation routes, and then they were able to train their families on how to evacuate in the future. And this was a great project that continued on beyond our time there. And for those who didn't have smart cell phones, we did have we had the VR goggles in a center that people could go and get trained. And if they were coming into the camp, they would go there to get that. But it translated into airports, and we ended up working with the Chicago O'Hare and Midway International airports on evacuation routes. And we taught 55,000 employees in Chicago evacuation, from vendors to TSA agents to you name it, so that we could keep people safe while they were traveling through the airports. So that is really the extent of what I wanted to go through for the meta themes of future survivors that we've seen over the 10 years. Future survivors are innovative, they're full of possibilities, and they love to streamline processes. So I'm really looking forward to a robust dialogue to hear about what you guys are thinking, definitely from Dr. Ann and Lorraine, or Laura as well. And back to Lorraine's question about what is the difference between the future survivor of the past and today. Really the biggest difference, and the only difference that I have seen, is there's just simply more of us. Disasters are more intense and more frequent, and we are just seeing more and more future survivors join our community. So with that, Lorraine, I will turn it back over to you.
Yeah, and I would love to actually pick on our co-panelists here. So I would like to poke at Ann and Laura, and what are your thoughts on how things have evolved over time, right? And what does survivor look like then as to now? And how would you compare that with your unique experiences between the Ballina with flood recovery, and then Ann in Queensland with your flood experiences and recovery? So going with the alphabet, Ann, could you go first? And then Laura, could you tag in?
Sure, not scary at all being first cab off the rank. Okay, so how they've changed over the years, the future survivors. I think from what I understand from people, in the olden days, which is not all that long ago, people would do things in a very ad hoc way. They would respond, they would be reactive. I think what we're seeing now is the emergence of the future survivor, who is much more strategic, much more informed, obviously prepared, and understanding for the various things that can go wrong when you are trying to follow a plan, and having contingencies in place. That's certainly the biggest thing that I've noticed. The big challenge, I reckon, to the continuation or the improvement or the spread of the future survivor is actually getting people to realize this stuff relates to them. And that was something that definitely came up in the research that my colleagues and I did about the floods in 2022 in Queensland and New South Wales. The number of people who said, I wasn't expecting it, and therefore I hadn't prepared because I didn't think it was anything to do with me. And that led to some really unfortunate outcomes. There has been talk about people being complacent. I would like to very firmly reject that. People were not complacent. They were unaware. They just didn't understand. When they were told, for example, it was a 1 in 100 year flood. We'd had one of those a couple of years ago. So everybody thought they were right for the next 98 years at least. So, you know, this use of information that people can misconstrue or misunderstand, that has a terrible impact on their willingness or even understanding of the need to prepare. I think that's a big thing for future survivors. Laura.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Desi, also for that presentation. And before I start, I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Ballina, which is Bundjalung country, and also pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Indigenous people here with us today. And I've loved living in Ballina, and it really has been such a great experience for me. And so in talking about what's happening in our local community, I just wanted to share two kind of main things from this perspective of what a survivor is in general, and then also what we're doing here locally in response to the experiences that we had in Ballina. So I'll just start by saying, in my connection and work with the field innovation team, I've also started to learn, and it's been a really great experience as to what it actually means to be a future survivor, and that everyone can identify in that in some way, shape, or form, whether it's, as Desi said, through a local disaster or through our experiences in the pandemic. And so coming off on that, we all have a role to wear, to play, or a hat that we wear in that situation. And coming with that analogy, what does an actual survivor look like? And how do we use that to fit into our lives and what we're going to continue? And that's the theme that I wanted to define this for us today as. So in general, what is a survivor, right? What is a future survivor? And as we've already established today, that includes innovation, that includes problem solving, but that includes also keeping it simple. And what I really enjoy about the 3-step prep that Desi talked about before is that it is simple. So the 3 basic things are that you identify what's happening, what's going on, the situation, etc. This is a very simplistic view of this program in just a quick few seconds. So there's more that we can go into it, but then you're establishing then from the what, who are you solving for? Why is that important to those people? Individually, the who, but then also why is it important to solve for that what? And then how are we going to do that? How are we going to find those solutions that are innovative and etc.? And that concept is very simple. And we've included that in our lives from a kid. What's happening? Why is it happening? Who? You know, the questions, who, what, where, when, why, we're taught that. So it's taking those principles, but and defining it for us. And we have that opportunity kind of to go back to those basics. And yet it's simple, but yet very effective. And it's very familiar, but it's a very intentional approach to how we view survivors, how we view the situations, whether it's a disaster, a calamity, or a crisis, as Desi talks about in that book, and then also how we're going to move forward. So in helping you kind of think about what a future survivor is, I now just want to mention our experience here in Ballina. And then leave you with the thought, to then open it up to the next phase. So Ballina Shire Council, that is where I'm employed, and it is also my community in which I live. And I'm very excited to be able to live here for the fact that it's by the coast and it's really beautiful. It's very flat, so we can ride bikes and etc. One thing that's very unique, and as the flood recovery officer, I'm like, oh man, we have so much work to do. And something that has constantly been reminded and explained to me in this community and in the 5 years that I've lived here is that Ballina's experience with disasters is in its infancy stage, and it has an opportunity to define what it is. And we're learning as a council and discovering what our community needs are, and through community consultation, what our survivors and who our impacted people are. And I want to stop there to say something. one thing that we're doing at council is trying to communicate, because words matter and we need to be very intentional. And in this area, a lot of people like to call, Australians very jokey. And so we call them floodies or we call them victims. And I think that it's very important to really embrace the power of the word survivor and help people empower. And also to realize, how do we even define if you've been impacted? Some people, and this is what we're finding in our local community, so that's what I'm speaking to, say, oh, I wasn't impacted by the floods. Yes, you were. The amount of water that you had in your home or didn't have in your home does not define your level of impact. Because as a community, regardless of if you had water or not, you might have taken in your family members for the last 18 months since the floods. And that is an impact. For 3 days, there was no communications. And there was a lack of the custom and what we're familiar with communicating. So cell phones didn't work, that you could still communicate, but it was a shock on the communications efforts. So that's what we're trying to do, is help people define what it means to be impacted, embrace and find their power in that, and then also solve for what they're looking for. So then I'll just leave it with, at Ballina Shire Council and at councils in general, we know rubbish, rates, and roads, right? That's like the core business. When you talk to like legacy council people, that's what we do. But now through the grant, so the community recovery officer position is one that's supposed to be like a state representative in the local council to provide a liaison at the local level to represent the state efforts, right? And so now we have this opportunity to embrace our new R word, which is recovery. And so how does council fit into that? And a lot of times we're just trying to take these recovery principles and what it means, and how to work, and then try to fit into it, right? But what I'm challenging us to do is to allow us to be at the local level and to allow us to do what we do and it fit us instead of us trying to fit into them. So Desi talked earlier about a boot camp that we ran, and I was able to I've been a member of FIT for a long time, very passionate, didn't really know about emergency management until I met Desi and FIT, and I've totally just have loved learning about this. And so the analogy that I have is with a hat. And so when it comes to surviving, being a survivor, what that means, defining it, and then how we're going to work in recovery efforts, oftentimes it's a bit hard on the screen to show, but imagine that we're trying to stand into the hat, right? That's not normally how you wear it. So we're trying to fit into what already is and find where we are. And so then that's like, oh, well, we'll define recovery, or we'll define impact, or we'll define survivor by stepping into what someone else has created and then standing in it. But that's not really the intention. And so what I am encouraging is that when we're defining the survivor, it's like, I am who I am, and this is something that's now adding value to my life. I'm putting it on top of what I already have, and then just adding to, I'm growing a little bit, because you can't see how short I am, but I'm a little taller with my hat on, and I'm growing. And so the survivor, the recovery, the efforts that are being made are adding value to me. So again, going to the to council, we are now adding a value to what we can do for our residents and for our community through the consultation, through defining, through the 3-step prep, all those types of things, to then add another resource to what we can do and define what that means. So that then as a community, we're doing rates, rubbish, roads, thank you, roads. Now we're doing recovery, and in an overall effort with the R theme, then we're building our resilience as a community and being able to then go into the future in a more effective way, so we can all be survivors and feel empowered to do so. So that's kind of what it means to me, and that's the opportunity that we have, and I hope that's helped you gain a bit of perspective into a way that we can be able to be intentional about the approach that we have. Thank you.
That's so freaking awesome. Thank you. Oh my goodness. I'm like, oh, let's go play. I want to play mayor, find the mayor and all this kind of stuff, or find the quokka. That'd be great. Let's internationalize it, right? So the passion that I'm hearing is so phenomenal. Thank you. And I guess I want to ask then, this right here gives me hope. It's one of my booster shots that helps me keep going when things are really like, you know, we don't hear thank you a whole lot, and we're not looking for that in our careers, but it's awesome to get that boost back. And so from your perspectives, what's giving you hope right now in how we emerge and empower the communities that we're working with? And then if you also have some ideas about things we can share with the audience on tricks of the trade, how do we move people from that unaware perspective and somehow get the message through to those folks we're trying to help? So could you each take a turn and maybe like touch on that, those little points a little bit? So I'll start with Desi, and then we'll go through with Laura and Anne as well. Would that be cool?
Totally. I'm going to keep it quick because I really hope that there's some great dialogue, by the way, Dr. Ann and Laura and Lorraine, between Marcus and Barb on this chat a ton. So if you get a chance, do read through it. Mine is very quick. I think we're doing a great job in a lot of ways of creating awareness. I certainly think the more exposure people have to disasters and they're hearing more about it, that makes people think. However, I think we need to make it fun. I really do. I think awareness is, if you really want to attract the masses, I think we had in Toronto, 5,000 people come join us voluntarily for a do tank. And you would ask, well, what would 5,000 people take the day off to come join and do a disaster do tank? Because it was so much fun, and they were prototyping, they felt that they were a part of a mission, that they were building something great together, and they were getting creative, and they were getting their hands, you know, dirty, rolling their sleeves up and doing things that they don't get to do. So I really believe if we want to build awareness, we got to make it fun, we got to be creative, and we got to do those 3 elemental things that future survivors are about, which is being innovative, thinking of the full possibilities, and streamlining into simple processes. So that's my 2 cents. And I'll turn it over to either Laura, or I'll turn it to Laura, and then I think Dr. Ann. So Laura, you're next on the list.
Okay, thanks. So what I kind of felt when I heard that question was 2 main things. Number 1, meet people where they are and help them to go where they need to go, right? And recovery in general needs to be community led. Again, there's some comments that are in the chat about that, and empowering communities at a local level, because what works for us and what we're adding to our hat at Ballina isn't the same as Lismore or some of the other areas in Queensland, etc., because we're going through a different experience, right? And so meeting people where they are and allowing people to be part of the conversation has really brought me hope, because when you're working, I think, as a professional in the disaster emergency management space, sometimes you take on a lot and you're like, wow, there's so much work to do, and etc. But what's really been bringing me hope is to be meeting people, boots on the ground, to be able to have these community consultations and hear from them and hear how little incremental change are making a big lasting impact, and that how we are kind of changing the dialogue, and we are trying to help people redefine, especially in this new space, what recovery looks like, what community-led recovery looks like, and how we can be a part of that. And then just being there to support people where they are, in addition to making it fun. And I think that that's where you can kind of have an opportunity to be open-minded and to kind of break the standard, this is just what we do, and be like, well, let's try this, or why not that? And there's just really so much area to play in that space, and help figure out what that's going to be, and then build people confidence. Because when we're doing these things, when we're being innovative, and when we're doing fun, creative recovery efforts, such as gallery workshops or art therapy or whatever, even a community morning tea, they're helping people be creative in the recovery, which is building their confidence. And then at the core of the word confidence is our identity. So we're helping people build their own identity and then empowering them. And so that's what gives me a lot of hope. And I find fun, not only to be involved as someone impacted by the flood, but also then to hear and watch people grow in their confidence.
Okay, follow that. Can I just say what she said, and that would be me done?
Nope.
I think there's a few things that I can draw on, both from my research experience with the floods and other contexts as well, and also bring a little bit of the academic stuff in, because it does have some use. There's a couple of models that I'm thinking about, particularly communication models, that talk about, and I refer to it as getting people to the dreaded line of awareness. So many people go, we get people aware and we're done. No, you're not. So the first thing exactly is building on Desi's example, how to get people aware of something. First of all, you've got to communicate, and it's amazing how often that doesn't happen. And then you have to get people to remember that communication, to retain that information, that knowledge, and to see its salience to them. If you can't get those sort of things, those ducks in a row, you're not going to get any further. So I think that's really, really important. The other thing that I would, while I'm talking to all these practitioners who know all about this, find a way to close the loop. So when you've done these fabulous activities and everyone's had fun, like with Desi's do boxes, I love that idea. I must explain to my cat that her do box is not the kind of thing, the do tank that you have. All right. So a cat's do box, completely different. What I would say is,
That was very amazing.
Yes, I'll do that again. Tell people what happened as a result of the time and effort and creativity that they gave to you. That not only reinforces them to do it again, it's one of those things that becomes part of the next iteration. People go, it's worth me doing this because this is what happened last time as a result. There is some point in me giving my time and my expertise and knowledge. So that to me is something that is so, so important, that we don't just stop when we've done the fun stuff and we've written our reports. I'm telling you this now because this is what I'm doing. We go back to people and we say, thank you for that. Here are the changes you made. And if you haven't made changes, own it. Tell people why. It's not pleasant. It's extremely embarrassing and can be awkward, but if you do that, you're building up that trust and that relationship with your community. That means next time you need something from them, they're likely to be much more receptive to your request.
That was awesome. So I heard some really cool points there. And one thing I'd like to touch on a little bit more, and I've seen this, I've had the blessing to work with all sorts of different audiences around the world. And a common theme is something that we forget to do, which is what Anne just touched on with closing the loop. So once we close the loop, then how do we inspire people to continue forward, right? So what I see happen a lot is we forget to celebrate the wins. So what I'd like to ask now from you each is name a favorite win that happened and share that with everybody here.
Let's let Dr. Ann or Laura go first. I feel like we've got to switch up the order. Dr. Ann, you've kind of been, let's start with you.
Yes.
Okay, so the things that we've seen, I'm reflecting back on some of the people that I spoke with during the most recent research that I've been doing, and there's one or two that have followed up with us and talked a little bit about how beneficial it was for them to actually participate in the research. They said one of the big problems for their community was they felt lost and forgotten. There was this huge rush of attention, global attention on these areas during the floods. And then afterwards, it was like, and we're done. Let's move on to the next disaster. And they felt it was just so empowering to them that the research team, which includes Barb Ryan, who's in the chat box there, was coming back and saying, tell us about your stories. Tell us about what happened to you. And they felt that that was so cathartic. It was part of their healing experience. So to know that we had offered that, which was not only, it wasn't unexpected, but the depth and the passion that people gave to us and then felt better for having done that, that was marvelous as a researcher.
That's awesome. And congratulations on that win. I think for me, I will tell you about Terry and Stuart, and those are my big wins. So we did this community morning tea, and we asked people after a series of like halfway through, because we committed to 8. How's it going? Are you enjoying this? Is it making a difference? And whatever. People gave feedback. And then I could just tell that Mr. Terry, who's probably like plus 75, was like, I have a reason to get out of my house. I was tinkering just in my garage, and I'd maybe go on occasion to the grocery store with my wife. But now I'm looking forward to these, because now I feel like I'm able to reconnect, and it gives me just that little bit more strength, so that after the community morning tea, when I go back to my home, which downstairs is still being rebuilt, and so we're living in an upstairs kind of makeshift situation, I have more strength to do that. So then when my, because I have these 2 roles at council, so when my IT information services boss was like, do these really make a difference? Like, I don't understand how these things make a difference. They're very touchy-feely and woo-woo and etc. And I said, and I told him about Terry. And yesterday I was talking to him, and he said, you know, the conversation in which you told me about Mr. Terry, and then you told me about how these small things make a big difference. It helped me completely redefine what recovery is, because he approached it from a council's perspective is, we're not reconstructing a new building. And so then he goes, but I can see now through this interaction how you built resiliency for Mr. Terry. And so the conversation that I had and the story that you told me has helped me really understand. And I now see what your purpose is in helping council redefine our experience with recovery and our connection to the community. And man, when I tell you, I wanted to be like, yeah, in the middle of that meeting, I was just so proud. And that's a moment that like helped me learn, but then also helped me understand that those are things that are making differences, and connecting and helping just people redefine their own definitions helps empower them as well.
All right, I'm gonna leave real quick because I know we're running close on time, and I think this ties into Melanie Taylor, who had a really important comment. I also really like a comment made by, let me see, the message board is always moving. John had a great comment, and Rowena has a very interesting one as well. Rowena, I hope to get back to it, but Melanie Taylor's comment is, I'm loving the positivity and energy that you're giving, but how are you addressing fatigue, disillusionment, cynicism, and communities post-disaster? I know it's not a pretty thing, but when we were in the field for 5 to 7 months post-disaster, the volunteers, communities, generally they are tired and they are feeling under-supported and angry. And Melanie, the one thing that we do with this design process that Laura had mentioned, the 3-step prep, is we do a ton of listening from the beginning to figure out why we're solving with them. We have to listen. And so they are angry, they are tired, they are disillusioned, but once they feel like people are listening, that's usually some of that turns around. I'm not saying it's a perfect solution. I worked with Emily, who was a firefighter in Rockport, Texas with Laura, and she had just lost her home. But the more we listened, the more we figured out why Emily needed what she needed, and we needed to help solve with her. So it's not a perfect answer, but designing with survivors and future survivors is what it's all about. So with that, I know we got 2 minutes, Lorraine. I don't know if we can tap into one more question or one more comment, but Melanie, I think we can get there if we listen.
Well, and I think actually that's the perfect closing of the loop, right? Is that word with. How often do we hear somebody said, I spoke to or I spoke at, when in fact we're supposed to be working with the community, not talking at them. So critical. Thank you so much. That was perfect. So thank you again to Desi, Lauren, and as always, thanks to everyone here for joining today. As you may already know, the webinar recording will be available shortly via the EMPA website, where you can also find info for EMPA's next webinar set for Wednesday, August 30th. Also available, registrations are open for EMPA New Zealand, returning to Wellington, October 19th to the 20th. Please also visit empa.org.au for webinar, conferences, and additional EMPA information. And I'd just like to say thank you for the gift of your time, for sharing this moment and this information with us. Wishing you each a beautiful day, and thank you again for joining us. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, future survivors.